Well, thank you very much to all of our speakers. What exciting and comprehensive and thought-provoking presentations those were. Um, Dr. Hijazi isn't able to be with us for this question and answer, but we have Drs. Patel and Kelly here. And as I was, thinking about this symposium and listening to sort of the speeches, I thought, oh my goodness, achieving health equity, what a big job. How are we ever going to do that? But both of you had some ideas that really makes it maybe not completely possible, but take us a long way there. So why don't we see if we have some questions? I guess we all want to go to gallery view. If you go to gallery view, is that what I want to do? And maybe to start off, Dr. Kelly, why did you choose Achieving Health Equity as your presidential initiative?
Yes, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes, that was actually quite easy for me. Number one, it's the type of work that I do, so it's part of my work experience as well as my lived experience. I am from the deep South in Gulfport, Mississippi, and I grew up in the community in which I was raised. I saw the impact of health disparities on the population. It was a predominantly it was an all-black neighborhood, and that was growing up in the '60s and the '70s. And then my area, especially, is clinical health. And so the type of work that I do, I'm constantly working with patients and I'm trying to help them navigate the healthcare system. And so I see health disparities every day in my professional life. And I felt, let's say, well, what is the thing that I believe that psychology can really do at this point in time to make a difference? And that is to look at health equity. And we have psychologists doing this work, but they're in public health and other areas. But I wanted to get kind of the best thinking in all the areas to see what it is that we can do in a unified manner to make a difference. And so that was in February of 2020 when I thought about that as my initiative, and I talked to the executive director of a public interest director, Dr. Brian Smedley, at that time, and and then he says, "Oh yes, that's what he does." And so 1 month later, we had, guess what, COVID, and we really began to see the impact of health disparities on the world population. And so, and just you could see the differences, and I saw it in the United States, and you saw who was impacted more: the indigenous, the blacks, and the Latinx populations more than anyone else, and for multiple reasons. And so it was just a timely thing that I got involved with it, and APA has just really embraced it in all areas. And I just hope that I know that this is the beginning of something meaningful. And so next week we will have our council of representatives meeting, and we will be passing policy on psychology's role in achieving health equity, and that's going to allow us to just continue to move forward and advance it. Thank you for asking.
And if there's any questions out there, just raise your hand and we'll turn to you. Dr. Patel, you've been involved in this kind of work for so long. What's the particular challenges of doing this in the US versus in some of the developing countries that you have done before?
Well, I think the honest truth is that one could not have done these randomized controlled trials in countries like the US because of the professional pushback. It would have not been possible to test this because there would have been questions raised about safety and et cetera, et cetera. And therefore, much of this innovation has really arisen in Africa, Latin America, and Asia, where the professional pushback is very, very much less visible, largely because there are such few professionals to begin with. I think as this evidence has become now impossible to ignore, and now has been embraced by virtually every global health body. It's really reassuring that in the U.S. there is, in fact, global think tanks in the U.S., like I mentioned, the RAND Corporation, and the government itself has recognized that actually an emphasis only on mental health professionals is not only unlikely to meet the needs that are needed, but it's not even necessary to meet the needs that are out there, for a variety of acceptability reasons as well. So I believe that actually we're on a very exciting place right now. When you can embrace the diversity of experiences and care approaches, I think that is when we will be able to shift the needle for mental health in this country and indeed around the world. And what's great is when the US embraces this kind of approach, it acts as a big signal to the rest of the world. So I'm very excited about that.
Fantastic. Natalie, I see your hand up. You're muted, Natalie.
I think I was thinking too about the professional pushback and wondered, as you now start on these endeavors in the US, where you see the most professional pushback will occur. And even with your linkage to the APA, I think I would still expect there's going to be a fair amount of professional pushback even within the discipline, and wondered how you were going to address that, and how maybe more specifically you're thinking about rolling this out perhaps as a way to address those issues.
So Natalie, that's a good question. I mean, I don't know. I can't foresee what the future will look like. And the main thing that the way we're dealing with this is by working in a coalition model, coalitions that involve mental health professionals. So not just the APA, but for example, in Texas, with the University of Texas's Department of Psychiatry, the Dell Medical School Department of Psychiatry. And so with people who are like us, who recognize that we do need a much more diverse approach to mental health care. Also ensuring that what we're doing is always part of the mental health care system, not as a silo that is separate. This is a fundamental aspect of our approach. We do not advocate this approach as being independent of the behavioral health care system. And in fact, we say that the ideal model is that these frontline workers are essentially a new weapon, if I can use that word, of collaborative care. And therefore, the collaborative care model remains the primary delivery model. But then in addition to the primary care practitioner who would only give a medication, a psychiatrist or psychologist who would largely deal with very enduring or severe or unresponsive patients, we now add psychotherapy. And that psychotherapy, in the absence of adequate professionals on the ground, can be delivered by adequately trained and supervised psychotherapists. And ultimately, do this slowly in steps. Don't go too fast, too far, is what my advisors will always tell me, and keep building evidence on the impact of the program, as well as whether there were any safety concerns that arose as you went along.
Well, I think we have time for one more question. I see Dr. Elaine Olowi. If I pronounce your name right.
You did a great job. Ola Oye, trill the vowels along. Ola Oye. Thank you, Dr. Patel, for a very challenging statement. I too was concerned about the professional pushback, but you stated some statistics. I mean, the need is great. And the question is, what is going to be the response? When we're spending more money and offering fewer services, regardless of professional pushback or whatever other objections you might have, there is a need to scale up care. So I'm interested in how you're dealing with that. The other observation that I've made over the years is that we have neglected family therapy a great deal. And to me, that was another very cost-effective way of dealing with our problems, and also of dealing with more people, because systems theory, basic systems theory says when you change one person, it's affecting everybody else, and everybody else needs help with that. So if you could just address those two issues really quickly.
Sure. Well, in the interest of time, I'll be very brief. Let me start with the latter one. I completely agree with you with the power of family therapy. The challenge we right now has, we don't yet have any evidence on how family therapy can be simplified enough for it to retain its active, effective ingredients and yet be that you could deliver with community health workers. So far, much of the science is focused on individual interventions. I have no doubt that that's the direction of travel we're going to go in the future. For example, there's now a big body of evidence on parenting interventions, which in a sense is not really family therapy, but it does involve not the patient, or rather the target person directly, but someone who's caregiving, in terms of early childhood development. And that is ready for scale up. So I think family therapy is the next step, and I hope that there will be some psychologists who are experts in that area who begin to look at how this can be scaled up. A great example of that is couples therapy for marital difficulties, which in my mind is one of the most important risk factors for depression and self-harm behavior in married individuals. So, again, not much evidence right now that this can be scaled up through non-professional, non-specialist workers, and so that's where that's the reason we are not doing that, is because we don't have the science yet. To your first question, yes, financing is a terribly important piece, and the reason why we're working in Texas is because there is a coalition of financiers who are already paying for the community health workers. So these community health workers are employees of the Baylor Scott White HMO, which is a large hospital system, and it is the Baylor Scott White folks and now the Dell Medical University folks who have actually embraced the idea of having their paid community health workers get deployed for depression care. So otherwise, of course, there's always going to be the question. The good news is Medicare and Medicaid both now, at least in I know that is in Texas, but I'm assuming it's across the country, now have a reimbursement code for community health worker delivered health interventions. So there's also a potential for reimbursement. But in other countries that I work in, India, for example, community health workers have been historically salaried by the state to provide healthcare. So this is not a question. The financing is already in place. The fact that they are now being asked to deliver mental health care is a more recent development, thanks to the national mental health policies in those countries.
As a New Yorker, do you have a comment on the initiative that was put out by Dr. de Blasio's wife? Because that was an experiment of sorts related.
It was. In fact, I should disclose, I was the co-chair of the scientific advisory board of Shirlane McRae's, it's called Thrive New York City, and I served on that as a co-chair for a few years. So I think that was the most extreme form of community-initiated care, where they didn't actually involve clinical interventions. It were more support interventions, and they work outside the health sector. And I think if there's one thing that I have learned from that effort is that you need to work with the health sector, so that people don't fall between the stools. I still think it was incredibly innovative, and I'm a great fan of the ex-First Lady's passion and her effort in New York. In fact, she brought the friendship bench. If you remember the image I showed in my slide from Zimbabwe, she put up friendship benches in Brooklyn. So she was really very innovative. But I think the fact that they were working completely outside the behavioral health system was perhaps strategically not the right thing to do. And so to sustain this is going to be an interesting question. Our approach has been to work within the health system, not outside the health system.
Collaborative approach. Thank you.
Yeah.
This has been such a wonderful presentation, such a wonderful discussion. You both have so much to share with us. I hate to end this session, but I'm going to have to. I thank you both again. I'm so excited about the partnership that you have going on, and it sounds like